You're listening to Change Your POV Podcast, episode 133.
And yet here was this one man standing in front of these kids and stopped three kids putting these aerosols up their nose, and something went off in my head right at that moment. Something snapped of direct action. I could see I wanted to be standing in front of kids delivering a message. I didn't even know what the message was, but I just said, that is my purpose.
Change Your POV is dedicated to helping veterans navigate all transitions of their life. One of the most common transitions is changing careers. Many veterans, myself included, have changed careers multiple times. Sometimes those changes come out of necessity. The economy shifts, companies go out of business, or are forced to downsize, creating layoffs. Sometimes these career changes are born out of boredom or lack of purpose at our current role. Whatever the case may be, these transitions are difficult and can test the fortitude of even the strongest. Our next guest shares his experience of transitions, how difficult yet rewarding they were. Hello, folks, and welcome to Change Your POV Podcast. I am your host, Eddie Lazary, and Bennett Tanton is on a hiatus again this evening, but that's okay. We will cover it without him. Today, I've got a special guest for you. He is from, as us Americans would say, down under, right? Mr. Julian Mather. He's a former Army sniper turned ABC TV cameraman for 25 years, turned kids magician, podcaster, online businessman, with a whole lot more in his portfolio of things that he's done and experiences that he's had in his life. With a few decades under his belt, he teaches those within a wiser demographic between 40 and 60 years old how online business can become a second career, perhaps a hobby, a way to make some extra cash, or just share their life experiences. I'm excited to have Julian on the show and allow him to share his experience with you, the listeners of Change Your POV Podcast. Welcome to the show, Julian. How are you doing?
I'm well. There's only one way I should really start, I guess, and that's just say g'day. You've built me up to be the down under Aussie, so g'day.
That's awesome. So I want to first kind of go backwards in time and talk about your military experience, and we will put all of the show notes for everything we talk about or all the links in the show notes for this episode over at changeyourpov.com/episode 133. That's where you'll be able to find everything that we're going to talk about, because we have a lot to cover. I don't know if we're going to get to it all. We may have you come back, Julian, for a follow-up show or something to kind of get some more information and resources from you, because you've got a whole host of stuff that you do. And we're going to get into the reason why you have a whole host of things that you do in your life here in a minute. But before we do, talk to us about your military career.
Well, my military career actually started in school because I did really well at school, if you don't count learning. I mean, I was my school's greatest underachiever. And I repeated my final year at school, which is year 12 here in Australia, because I did so poorly in my first year. And when I went back the second year, I actually did worse than I did in my first year. So about halfway through this, I could see that this was a very, very bad mistake. So I started to truant, or I don't know, is truant a word you use?
Yep.
Yeah. So I was truant from school, and I became a chronic truant. And what I did, though, was I took myself to the State Library in our city of Brisbane, and there I got every book on photography, every book on photojournalism that I could get my hands on, because that's what I wanted to be. It's just I knew I had a passion for that, and I just spent literally months in there wagging school, going through these books. And I learned something. This is my first step. I mean, I've done a lot of career changes in my life, and my first step I always do is I immerse myself in whatever it is that interests me. When I say immerse myself, I mean immerse myself. So in this case, I had no money, and I just went to the library and I sucked everything I could get out of these books, and I read and I reread, and I looked at the pictures, and I looked at the grainy black and white Vietnam War photos. But what I get from immersing myself is you look for patterns. And you read between the lines, and the more useful information comes from between the lines. And what I learned from looking at all those photos was that photojournalists broke rules. And to get great photos, you had to, when people said, no, don't take the photo, was the point you really should take the photo. And so I started to learn from that if I wanted to be a photojournalist, I needed to get where the action was and break the rules. So we had at this state, and at this time in our state of Queensland, we had a dictatorial premier, which is like your governor in the USA, and he had banned street marches. Couldn't protest, and so there were street marches about not being able to street march.
Right.
And these were violent protests. It was the blue line, the white line and the blue line, the police and the protesters, and it was sort of fisticuffs, and it was violent, and people getting dragged out. So I decided this is where I needed to start my photojournalism career. So I jumped in there, and the policeman told me to stand on the footpath, and I remembered the lessons I learned from between the lines, and I jumped in and just started clicking photos. And I didn't get arrested, but I got physically put back on the footpath because I was just like a young, dumb 17-year-old. I got there and I knew, right, this is what I wanted to do. But what I also learned was that I needed not to be in Brisbane because most photojournalism was in different parts of the world. So I was walking around a bit lost and doing some part-time jobs, and I'd been on unemployment benefits, and I saw a bus shelter with an army recruiting poster on the side. And these soldiers, Australian soldiers, were in a pine forest. Now, in the USA and the Northern Hemisphere, pine forests are like weeds over there. But in Australia, we're the land of eucalypt trees and outback and deserts, and pine forests seemed really exotic to me. And I thought, I want to be where those pine trees are. That looks really exciting. So on the strength of that, I joined the Army. So I got in there. And, they're really nice to you. You've all been through this. They're really nice to you in that, first couple of days of weeks of tests. And then I signed on the line and I got in. They started yelling and they didn't stop for 3 years. And when I got in there, I started to realize, I got in and I said, I wanted to get into photography in the Army. And they all just laughed at me in the Army. And they said, they didn't tell you that, did they? You didn't buy that line, did you? They said, no, we got a better job for you over here in the infantry. So I went in and just became a regular infantryman and got posted to a battalion. And I started to realize that, a lot of the people giving me instructions and commands, I don't know, I didn't seem a whole heap smarter than I was. And I thought, maybe I've got to look what other options there are. And so I had a look at officer training. And I went through the officer training program, and they saw right through me because I've been a lot of things in my 55 years, Eddie, but I've never been a team player. And, you need to be a team player to, to be an officer. And that wasn't for me, so I started to look what else there was. And then I found out that you could be a sniper. And I thought, oh, this is perfect because I could indulge in my favorite pastime, and that's being antisocial, just being a really miserable cave-dwelling person, not have to answer to anyone. So I started down that line and went through in Australia. It was a 7-week course with 7 subjects, and you fail one of the subjects. They have a test every week, so you got, was that 7, so what's that, 49 tests, and if you fail one of them, you're out. And I so close to failing. It's a whole nother story, but I got through and became a sniper. I did my 3 years and I had to reevaluate at the end, and I still was passionate about being a photojournalist, and I tried to get into the public relations department of the Army, and they said, oh, well, look, we can't guarantee you that, but if you re-sign for another 3 years, I'm sure we can find a spot for you. And I thought, well, based upon your original, lies that you broke to me, I probably won't resign. So, yeah, I got out of the Army, and that was my Army career. Look, I loved it when I did it. I would recommend it to anyone, but as a career, certainly it wasn't for me.
So were you able to exit the military and move into journalism, or was that a fight as well?
What happened was, and again, this is another, when I was in the Army, I decided I wasn't going to be in the Army, but I wanted to get into then camera work. Instead of just being a photojournalist, I wanted to be a TV documentary cameraman. So I had to immerse myself. And so I went to the library in this small town I was in, and there was one book called The 10 C's of Cinematography, and I got that and I read and reread that and started making all these little films when I was in the Army on the old Super 8 and editing them up on splicers, and we'd have movie nights in the Army. And that when I got out, no, there was no jobs for TV cameramen. So I did a private cinematography course. Then we've got our ABC over here is not your ABC in America. Ours is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. It's government funded. It's funded by the taxpayer. So the best model, I could say, it's similar to the BBC in Britain.
Right.
And in the US, it's sort of like PBS. But I know PBS, they ask for donations, but it's that sort of does documentaries, and they had a traineeship, and it was a bit of a hard process to get into there. But I think what got me in was two things. One, so there were about 500 applicants and there were 5 positions, and I got down to the short list of 32 people. And I remember reading somewhere, if you're ever going to go for an interview, ask for the first position or the last position, because they'll remember the first, they'll remember the last, and everything in the middle. The middle is just mental, blancmange. You can't remember anything. So I asked for the first position that was available, and I got that. And when I went in, 3 of the panel were ex-Navy. Now, I know they're squid lids, but, I was Army. I still had that connection, and I really think that helped me get in. And I got into this, ABC, and did wonderful training and spent 25 years basically traveling around the world. I mean, it was great. This is literally in the early days, I used to put money in one hand, a plane ticket in the other, and with their boot kick me out the door and go cover this. And that's, I ended up in the USA for about 20 trips and have worked there for, I don't know, somewhere between 12 and 18 months on and off, and traveled all around the world, had a great time. But then I got sick of that at the end, to be honest. I mean, it was a top job that people would have cut off their right arm for. But what it didn't have for me after a long time was self-determination, and I was desperate for self-determination. So that's when I started to think about doing other things.
Yeah, so you wrote a book. It's called The Second Best Job in the World, An Extraordinary Adventures of an ABC Cameraman. So was being a cameraman the second best job in the world? And if so, what was the first?
Well, look. I mean, the short of that is you got to read the book to find out.
yeah.
What is the best? But it was the second best job in the world, and it came from a line that a sound recordist I used to work with named Wok. I mean, Wok had like 1,000 years experience in street cutting to match. He's just this really interesting guy, and he was always say, "Yeah, this is the second best job in the world," because we got to travel. Go to really interesting places, people. You got an all access pass to life. I mean, you put a camera, a TV crew, they let you in almost anywhere. We always had to carry the gear everywhere we went with 20 cases of gear. And when you actually think about that, you get up in the morning in your hotel room, you take 20 cases, and you put them on the trolley, and you wheel them to the elevator. And you wait for the door to open, and then, of course, the door's not wide enough, so you take the cases off and you stack them in there. You get down the bottom, and it's back on the trolley, and you've got to load into the car, drive to the airport, 20 cases out on the trolleys, load them into the this process goes on. So the best job in the world was, do you know who David Attenborough is?
I've heard the name, yes.
Yeah, David, he's like the wildlife guy from the BBC, like he's just, he's for 50 years or 40 something years, just traveled the world to the most unbelievable locations. So he goes with a camera crew. He does everything we do, but he doesn't have to carry the cases. So he's got the best job in the world. We've got the second best job.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from.
That makes sense. One of the things that is inspiring for me about you, Julian, is this idea of career hopping, right? And a lot of people hear that and they think it's a bad thing or a negative thing. And I guess in some ways it could be, but I think what's worse than career hopping is staying in a career that you're no longer fulfilled in just for the sake of staying in it because you're scared of the unknown, or you're scared of pursuing something you're actually passionate about. And the reason why I bring this up is because this is one of the very common things that I see in my co-host Bennett, that we see with veterans, and this in its career hopping. And what's weird is the guys that have been in the military longer seem to have a little bit more of a track record for more career hopping. And I think it's because guys that do, a few years, their minimum enlistment or whatever, a lot of those guys will do their 3 or 4 years, and then they'll get out and they'll just go back into doing whatever they were doing before they went into the military. So if they were doing roofing, for example, in high school, or they were working on, for their dad, whatever, before they went in, they do their 3 years, they get out and they go right back into doing whatever job that they were doing. But the guys that spent, say 10 plus years in the military, they get out and they know they don't want to go back to the job that they were doing before they went in. And they have an idea of what they think they want to do. And then they actually get into that job or that career field and realize, oh man, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I don't feel the same fulfillment that I thought I would. And so they move to a different career and a different career and a different career. And sometimes it could take, 4 or 5, 6 goes at a complete career change before these veterans actually land in a place that they feel, one, that they're valued in, two, that they can feel like they're giving back in terms of they're satisfied in what they're doing. Because it's very difficult being in the military, because you're in the military, you are doing something bigger than yourself. You're working for a team, for a larger collective than yourself. There's purpose, there's direction, there's motivation. Sometimes it's false motivation, but motivation nonetheless, right? And then you get out, and it's very difficult sometimes to find that same level of purpose. And so I do like this idea, or your experience of moving from career to career. And you don't do it just willy-nilly. You do it, and matter of fact, one of your podcasts, and folks, Julian is the host of Tailor Made Career Podcast. And right now he's got the first season up right now. It's 10 episodes. I've listened to all 10 of them. Highly recommend that you go and check that out. The links will be in the show notes. But one of those episodes, you talk about this struggle, this moment in your life where you realized that you couldn't be, not that you didn't want to be, but you just couldn't be a cameraman anymore. And you said you mourned for your career when you moved on to something else. So describe for us kind of this, how did that come to be, and why did you make that move?
I was in the UK shooting a documentary on restorative justice. Restorative justice is this idea where you take the perpetrators of crime and put them face to face with the victims of the crime, so you can be one-on-one what the consequences of your actions were. And so we were working with the police in the UK in the Thames Valley, and we went to a school. It was called Drayton Comprehensive School. It was where Gordon Ramsay went to school. Gordon Ramsay is that celebrity chef. I don't know if you know Hell's Kitchen.
Oh yeah.
And you see he swears a lot. He's a crazy guy. So if you can imagine a whole lot of these little Gordon Ramsays, foul-mouthed little guys with lots of lip running around, it was a tough school. And it was so tough it had its own policeman. That was his office. That's where he went to work every day, was at the school, because they just had so many problems. Anyway, this policeman was called PC Graham Waddington, Police Constable Graham Waddington. And I was down the back of a classroom of 15-year-olds that he was talking to one day, and I was filming him in action, and I was in awe of this guy. He was just speaking to this motley bunch of 15-year-olds, and he wasn't speaking at them, he wasn't speaking above them or below them. He was just speaking with them, and they were hanging on his every word. And then the bell went, and all the chairs and the desks scattered, and they went everywhere. And from my position in the back of the classroom, I was the only person who could see this. As these kids walked out, these 15-year-olds, 3 of them, as they passed his desk, just reached into their bags and without saying a word, put a can of aerosol on the desk and walked out. So when the classroom emptied, there were 3 cans of aerosol on the desk. Now, he was talking to these kids about the problem of substance abuse and aerosol sniffing, which was really big at the time. So, basically they take a can of deodorant and put it up their nose and get a high off that. And so from just talking to these kids, he stopped 3 kids putting a can of aerosol up their nose that day. Now, at the same time, being in television, I had literally filmed, dozens, if not hundreds of launches of government-funded programs, all well-meaning, with hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars spent to, stop this sort of problem with little results. It's a burden of government programs that don't work a lot. And yet here was this one man standing in front of these kids and stopped 3 kids putting these aerosols up their nose, and something went off in my head right at that moment. Something snapped of direct action. I could see I wanted to be standing in front of kids delivering a message. I didn't even know what the message was, but I just said, that is my purpose, because I knew that I could relate with kids. So that's where my TV career and this new career of working with children started, and this divergence happened. But, this doesn't happen overnight. It took another 5 years or so. I always work in 5-year sort of blocks. But it got to the point where I'd been building up, and I'd been becoming interested in magic and doing magic. And in my TV work, I was out there filming, and people know I was doing magic. And I'd say, oh, come, you're in the community. Can you come down to the school and do some magic down there? And I was always underprepared. So then I built up this Anytime, Any Place show, and I could do a show. And so by the time I eventually left television, I'd done a couple of hundred school shows, around Australia. I've done them overseas in the USA, New Zealand, South Africa. Anyway, I had this real passion. And then I had this idea. When we were filming, we would do interviews with many captains of industry, the head of a bank or a politician. And I got interested in philanthropy because we did a series on these dynastical families in Australia. So, where 3 generations had carried a family business or a purpose on. And there was one, we got in a family called the Meyer family who started up philanthropy in Australia. Now, philanthropy in the USA is really common. I mean, with Bill Gates and all, it's a big thing, but it's not such a big thing in Australia. And I came to learn that countries which are probably more socialist, like Australia and the UK, compared to the USA, where there is good social safety nets, philanthropy is not big. So philanthropy wasn't well known, but I could see the power of this about taking an amount of money and putting it at the root cause of a problem to solve a problem, rather than what charity does. Charity is something's happened in a sense, and it's a Band-Aid solution. We all put our hands in our pockets and put a small amount of money in, and it's very worthy. But if you could take that money and put it at the cause of a problem, stop the problem, so prevention rather than cure, I got really interested in this. So as I was interviewing people, it could be the head of a bank, I'd go, well, what do you think about philanthropy? And they'd say 2 responses to me. They'd say, I'm going to do that when I retire, or I don't really know that much about it. But, it's something I plan to look into. And I used to think, no, that's crazy. You're in a position of authority and power. You've got your hands on the levers. You could be creating so much good. But they didn't get it. And so in my head, I thought, well, if you can't teach old dogs new tricks, can you teach the young pups new tricks? So I got this idea in my head that I was going to teach primary age children, so kids basically from about 8 or 9 years old to 11 years old, this idea of philanthropy, and start a new generation of younger people with this idea of philanthropy. So I decided I was going to leave my 25-year-old career in TV, where, I'd got to the top of the tree. I had, I had the awards and the accreditations. I'd basically hit the ceiling up the top. It was all going well for me. But in my heart, I knew I wanted self-determination, and I had this passion, and I just knew I had to follow it. So, it was a bit of a long time coming, but the moment I knew was I was sitting on my kitchen bench, and I was listening to the local ABC radio station. And it was a program about the court system, and actually that's irrelevant what that was about, but I sat on the bench, and something went off in me, and I knew that's the moment. I actually cried. I actually mourned for my career. Because being a cameraman was 25 years. It was it was the fabric of who I was. I'd built my identity around this, but just there was this bigger purpose and calling, and it is literally mourning. It hurts. When you mourn someone, a person, you feel that tearing inside you. That's what it felt like.
Right.
I sat there and cried for about 10 minutes, and basically sobbed. But after that, and it was almost, I knew it was the right move, because, if I was invested that much into it, it was a really good indicator that this is something that means so much to me that I'm willing to give up this big part of me. And it was it was the pivotal point where I said, right, okay, I've been preparing, but it's now time to really start, one foot in front of the other. I've got my direction and off I go.
Yeah. And now you've built up a successful business with magic and children. And as a matter of fact, there's a website. Could you read the website for listeners as well?
It's kidsentertainerhub.com. So it's kidsentertainerhub.com. We train other kids entertainers around the world because I got into kids entertaining. How I got into kids entertaining, this is a very important part. This big project to get out and teach philanthropy to kids around, to around Australia, then hopefully around the world. Big vision in my mind. I fell flat on my face with it because I got out there and everyone I spoke to about it said, "Oh, that's a wonderful idea." And yeah, it's really worthy, and the schools said it's worthy, and the government said it was worthy. And when I went and I put the program in place, and I said to schools, "Well, will you book me?" They said, "Oh no, we're not going to book you. We don't need that. We need science and maths, and we need that." And I learned my first lesson about marketing: never open a restaurant unless you got a starving crowd. I just didn't understand that. Like I said, I came from a public taxpayer-funded business. I didn't know anything about commercial business. So, very foolish looking back on it, but I had to recover from that. So I'd burnt my bridges in the world of TV. I was, using kids entertaining and kids magic as the hook to get the attention of these kids to deliver this message of philanthropy upon. I had to reinvent myself. So I became a local kids entertainer, a kids magician, and I had to learn about business and starting a small business. And when I went through this and I established myself and I was online, and then I started to put some videos on YouTube about how to do some simple kids tricks. It was part to build up my website and to get a bit more traction. And they sort of, strangely enough, became popular. I've got a YouTube channel up there, Julian's Magician School. It's currently got about 30 million views, something like that. I honestly don't even go and look at it now, to be quite honest. But that taught me something as well, is that I didn't understand, and I understand it intrinsically now. There is so much opportunity online, and particularly 40 to 60-year-olds think, oh, no, it's all the young person's world. No, it's not. It is made for people who are individuals. And here's the thing. We all go online and we go, right, I like the sound of that person or this person. I'm going to be trying to be like them. And you can't see the forest for the trees. You are an individual. We all come out of the mold like this. We have the biggest qualification we need to be online is just to be yourself. And that's how I became successful in this YouTube channel in some small measure, was that everyone else was doing, with these young guys, and they're all doing this fancy technical magic moves, with, it was a set of hands doing card flourishes. I had no idea how to do this stuff. And I went on there and said, no, I'm a daggy 50-year-old, and I love doing simple tricks you can make with a bit of folded paper and a bit of string and some sticky tape. And I went in and said, I'm just going to do those. And I gave little stories about how to present these. And, no one else was doing that because no one else was me. And I got in there and people said, oh, this is something different. Now, not everyone likes me. Other people got really annoyed with me, but you can't please everyone. And I got on there and I just built this following because I was different and not trying to be like everyone else. There is so much opportunity online. I just wake up every morning, Eddie, and I look and I just go, wow. I basically go, what can I do today? I've got to follow these businesses through. Part of the problem is keeping my head in check because it runs off in a million different directions because there is so much opportunity online. And part of what I want to do is if you're out there and it doesn't matter what age you are, but because I'm 55, I can relate to sort of like the 40 to 60-year-old audience. Is I just want to tell people it might not be for you, but you got to start looking online. There's so many different ways that you might find some benefit online. And it might not just be making money. It might be that you can start talking to someone. You can just start sharing information. You can start building a community with someone else. There's just so much potential.
Yeah, and it's funny because when we first started the Change Your POV podcast, of course, the message was to veterans, and we're veterans. And you don't know who you're going to reach. You don't know who you're going to touch with your message. I mean, you have a target audience, right? You have a list of or some demographic of people that you're trying to reach, but you're going to end up reaching people you don't expect. And I first came into that with the podcast about halfway through where I'm at now. So about 6 months ago or so, my daughter, who is now 14, ended up hearing one of my shows. And my co-host, Bennett, and I, we were talking about something. It was an experience that I had when I served in Iraq. And, it wasn't, like I said, I wasn't telling the story, for her, but she had listened to it. And she says, wow, Dad, I didn't know that about you. And so this podcast has been an avenue by which I can help educate, because my daughter was 2 when I went to Iraq, so she doesn't remember it. My son was, 9, so he remembers me going, but he didn't know a lot of the things that happened while I was there because we just didn't share that with him because of his age. But now he's 21 and my daughter's, 14, so they're old enough now to understand and get it. And so the stories that I'm telling now, they're just hearing for the first time. And I've been living with these stories for now 15 or 12 or so years, whatever it is. And so it's an amazing thing. If you've got an ambition to do something, and doing it online is the barrier of entry is so low compared to the way you would have to do it, even 10, 15 years ago, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. I can tell you from the world of TV, what I'm sitting here with this microphone setup, which is only a matter of a couple of $100 and, computer or your laptop. If in television, what I'm doing with you now, we would have had to book the satellite link, which came in probably $1,250 for every 10 minutes of time on that. And then you'd have to have the studio crew to come in and, the makeup, it's just insane. And you would have had to book that. And if you had an idea that I wanted to, start a podcast on something, you would have had to put it through to the committee, mm-hmm. and the committee would have taken 6 months to come back on it, and then I strangled the life out of it. And then if they said yes, they would have put it to a team of people, and that just would have, been a misery to actually produce. The speed. I've got another podcast idea that I'm working on now. Honestly, I did screen capture of the process. It took me 36 hours. I just had an idea to getting it up to the point where we said, okay, let's make it go. And you know what the cost is? $15. That's it.
Right.
Yeah. It's just just insane. I just want to go back on this podcasting bit about what you were saying about the story, Eddie, about your story and your daughter hearing that. Mm-hmm. It is so true. This podcasting now, what all you guys and women out there are listening to now, it has been hijacked by the marketing community. So what happens is that, like you're right, if you want to start an online business, and this is available, I do this, I'm putting my hands up, I'm guilty to this, but the bottom line is we want to try to sell you something. We want to try to help you, mm-hmm. but we want to try to sell you something at the end of the process. So you listen to the podcast, and we say go to the website, and that's all fine. But podcasting has been hijacked by the online marketing industry. Yet I look at this technology for a few $100s. So many people could be using this just to communicate with each other, just to share. So you might say, I love model sailboats, but, no one around me likes model sailboats. I'm left to just tinker on my own by myself. It doesn't matter what your interest is. You could start up a podcast. You could go onto Facebook and start a little Facebook group for free and just start. And then one person will start listening, becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, and you can just build. And even if you built to 20 people and you build a community that you could share the benefits to just your mental well-being rather than sitting in front of the television is so beneficial. And to this end, I've created something. It's called Boomercasting, which is a training course for over 50-year-olds on how to set up podcasting, but how to do it if you're not even interested in any commercial gain out of it. And the best one I am getting back to this point about your family, Eddie. The best way to get used to starting up a podcast is start a family podcast. Record your family history or record your stories. So, when Uncle Billy comes over and you're all worried that Uncle Billy's going to, shuffle off pretty soon, but, and all these stories are going to be lost, all you've got to do is your iPhone, your smartphone, hit the little recorder on that, sit it down, have a 20-minute chat to Uncle Billy and upload it onto your podcast and collect all your family stories in one place. And that will teach you the process of podcasting. So I've got another thing called yourfamilypodcast.com. If you go there, there's 12 free videos. It takes you through the process of how to start a podcast for no financial imperative. And then if you want more detail, there's another course you can follow. But to get started and how to use this technology, because it's so beneficial. And you'll back me up on this, Eddie. Just getting there and doing what we're doing now and talking and getting the thoughts out of your head and the emotions out of your gut and just talking with someone is so beneficial every time you do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing, too, is with the veteran community, a lot of what's missing is the ability to just talk with other people that get it. You hear that term a lot, right? I don't like talking to this person because they don't get it. I don't like going to the VA because I talk to people that haven't served and they don't get it. Well, that's fine. Find somebody that gets it. As a matter of fact, Bennett and I found him, just like you suggested, I found him on a Facebook group. He lived in Delaware at the time. I live in New Hampshire. We decided to do this podcast together, and we had almost, over 100 episodes released before we met for the very first time. And so it's just it's incredible because I couldn't find anyone in and around me that was interested in the things I was interested in. And, and so I created it, and I found somebody that was equally as interested in it. He subsequently moved to Syracuse, New York, so it's much closer, but still 4-hour drive. And we try to link up at least once a quarter or so now, but it's an amazing thing to do. And he was actually talking about doing what you're saying, the very thing that you're talking about. He was going to create what's called what he was going to call his last name is Tanton, and so he was going to call it the Tanton Family Circus. And it was just creating a podcast with him and his family and his young daughters, and just capturing stories and ideas. Because let me tell you, 15, 20 years from now, when those little girls grow up and become adults and have maybe kids of their own, what an invaluable resource that would be, right?
It's just amazing. And honestly, you need a smartphone. And if you got something like a Libsyn $5 account, you could, and just put a bit up every month. That's what the barrier to entry is so low, but the benefits are there, the opportunities are there. But opportunity is only useful if you know something's there,
right?
And and what you're doing, Eddie, and what I'm doing is basically just spreading the message. And I'm just an average guy. I really am. I mean, I've got certain strengths and I've got certain weaknesses. No more, no less than anybody else out there. And the reason I'm doing this and I'm at this position is not because I'm better than anyone else. I just happen to be a little bit further ahead in the process. And this whole process is learnable now.
One of the things that you talked about on one of your shows that I found incredibly interesting was this, the 9-year curse. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, the 9-year curse. Very, very happy to. Always avoid the 9-year curse at all costs. So when I was traveling around as a TV cameraman and I had this ringside view of life, I got to meet a lot of successful people and a lot of unsuccessful people. And again, it's always about patterns. You notice patterns after a while. And, I met successful politicians and I met unsuccessful politicians. So it wasn't, that you had power at your fingertips that made you successful. I met successful sports stars and unsuccessful sports stars. So, being born with innate talents wasn't, the thing to being successful. One thing that struck me, and the reason I could see this too, is that I worked in long form television, which is documentary work. So as opposed to news, where you're in and out, just, half an hour here, and, you're covering something for the nightly news. I might be with someone for days, weeks, or months, or even overextended, a couple of weeks every year on long-term projects. So you just get to know people and you get to hang around with them behind the scenes. You get to spend time in their houses, in their downtimes, and on their weekends. And I started to notice something, that successful people didn't watch much television. They couldn't tell you who won American Idol. They couldn't tell you, whatever else, the reality TV program was going on. They were spending their time more productively than watching television. So, I got to thinking about this, and basically the average Western TV viewer watches 3 to 4 hours a day. Now, that sounds fair to me, Eddie. I mean, come home after a long day, chill out, watch a bit of TV. Yeah, it doesn't sound bad. It's actually a benign statistic. But let me repackage those figures for you. That's 52 full days a year. And I mean, that's 24 hours a day for 52 days a year that you sit in front of the TV. Still doesn't sound too bad. Okay, let's repackage it further. By the time you are 65, you will have spent 9 whole years of your life. That's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, times 9 years sitting on the couch watching something which at best I reckon is pretty second rate. There's not much great TV out there. So here's my question. If you were designing the perfect life for yourself, for you or your grandchild, would you include 9 years, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, sitting on the couch watching TV? And I've asked that to a lot of people, and not one person has ever said, yes, I would put that in my design. So why do we do it to ourselves? So that's what I reckon the 9-year curse is that it's actually understanding that is sucking so much potential out of my life, is getting away from the TV and turning it off. Now, I'm not saying go cold turkey on this, and it's not that I don't watch TV. I still watch some TV, but it really is in moderation, and I use that time for more productive stuff. Now, here's an immediate switch that you can do, right? Trade 1 hour of TV for 1 hour of podcast listening, because 90% of podcasts out there are educational. And honestly, there's something, there's about 200 or 300,000 podcasts. Half of those are dead, okay, right, haven't existed. But there's well over 100,000. And they cover such a broad range, really, that you'd have to be trying pretty hard not to find something that you'd be interested in, right? So listen to 1 hour, trade 1 hour of TV for 1 hour of podcast, right? But don't do it sitting. Get up off your ass and get out there and walk, okay? And okay, you guys are in the middle of winter and and it's cold winter, you don't want to go out walking. Okay, iron the clothes. Do it for your wife if that's the situation, or do something, or cook a meal. Do something else where you're standing and listen and get used to educating yourself in what I call the free university of life, which is podcasting. It's like you're listening to this now, right? And then you've killed, a couple of birds with one stone. You've stopped the 9-year curse. You're educating yourself, and you're doing something that's healthy. That's the 9-year curse.
And that's so awesome. As a matter of fact, that resonated with me a lot because right before you contacted me, I had just released an episode called Finding the Margins in Your Life and Making the Most of Them. Because so many people in and around my life and Bennett's life, my co-host, they'll say, oh, I really love what you guys do. I can't imagine I could ever do anything like that because I just don't have the time. And so what that really means, if you were to unpackage this, right? If you were to peel back the onion, the layers of the onion, so to speak, when somebody says, quote, I don't have time to do that, what they're really saying is, I haven't made that a priority. Because, the margins in our life are the things that really, in the long term, add no value. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with watching TV, but on your deathbed, right? Could you look back and say to yourself, I value the 9 years that I spent watching TV. Right? Can imagine yourself, you're many, many years in the future, and in your last moments of life, and you're with your family, and somebody says you've spent in the equivalent of 9 years of your life watching TV. Would you have done that the same? Would you have done that differently? I bet you most people would say, I would have rather have taken those 9 years, or at least half of those 9 years, and done something productive, or spent it with my family, or built better relationships, or built an online business, or got a college degree, or lost some weight. The list of things that people want to do are endless. They go on and on and on and on and on. And the number one reason why they can't do it is because they don't have the time.
Yeah, I mean, in 20 years ago, things were maybe more difficult. But now, if you carry a smartphone in your pocket, you have a portal to the world and a portal to opportunity on you at all times.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I was listening to something of his. I was listening to something of his the other day, and he said that, somebody asked him the question, what's more important, IQ or EQ? Right? IQ being the intellectual quotient, and the EQ being emotional quotient. And he said that now in today's day and age, IQ isn't as highly regarded, because if you want to know something, like you said, it's at your fingertips. It's on your phone. If you want to know, how many feet Mount Everest is, or you want to know the conversion between centimeters or inches, you want to know, how hot the surface of the sun, you want to know, it doesn't matter what it is you want to know. It's at your fingertips. I mean, people, 100 years ago, or even not even that long ago, if they wanted to know something, they had to research it. They had to go to the library. They had to learn it. They had to go to school. They had to have formal education. They had to learn it and practice it. Now, my daughter's doing math and she's whipping out her homework, and I'm like, wow, that was quick. What'd you do? She said, all the formulas are online. I can convert things. I punch in what the variable is, and boom, there it is. It's like, okay, maybe that's cheating or whatever you want to call it, but is it really cheating nowadays? Because if that's the case, then we cheat all the time with information at our fingertips. So it's really the emotional quotient that's more valuable, and that's the ability to understand what's valuable in your life. And if you aren't on the right course or the right track, making the conscious decision to change it and to make something different. It's not going to come, like we say, it's not going to fall out of the sky into our lap. Nothing positive or worth doing or worth having in your life is just going to fall out of the sky and land in your lap. You've got to go out and get it. You've got to go out and create it.
No, look, definitely. And there's nowadays with that emotional quotient, one thing you need to do is you need to be able to communicate, because we have all this, instant access to these communication tools like podcasting, like YouTube, like writing blogs. You need to be able to communicate your ideas. And if you've got any ideas or thoughts or passions, unless you can communicate them, they basically mean nothing. And my one suggestion I recommend to people is join Toastmasters. Now, I'll tell you why I say this. I've been in there 3 years now, and I've held off for 3 years until I've just recently started promoting this. And I'll tell you why I held off 3 years, because I spent 3 years in the Army. And in the Army, I saw boys turn into men. I saw what the process was. I saw it ruin some people, but I saw by and large the benefit it did to individuals was wonderful. And I waited for 3 years in Toastmasters to see if I could say the same thing. And the change I see with people who in our situation, we have a set of stairs that comes up into our room where we meet, and I see people come up there as nervous, shy people. Everyone's got their own reason for coming. And those who stay the 3 years, I'll tell you what, you just see the change. And why you see the change is because Toastmasters, in our situation, is every fortnight. And people turn up every fortnight just to improve themselves a little bit by a little bit, just to chip away. It's like that old thing, that a statue is always within that block of stone. The thing is just to chip away the stone on the outside to reveal it. And that's what it's like at Toastmasters. I've seen people improve consistently over these 3 years. And it's available to anyone. Now, the reason I promote it as well is that I've when I was in ABC TV, we used to have these corporate programs that would come in and, come in for your 1 day or 2 day public speaking or communications course, and you learn nothing. You learn some tips and some ideas, but you can't put them into practice in a couple of hours over a few days. But having a place like Toastmasters, and it's ridiculously cheap. It's like a couple of $100 a year for the world's best personal development course. And it's not public speaking. Public speaking is part of it. It's personal development. It's leadership growth. It's so many things. I recommend it to anyone who's going, I'd like to do something different, but I'm not sure where to start. Well, here's 2 ways. Actually, I'll give you 3 ways. 3 immediate steps that you can do. You can start tomorrow. And this is what I call my online, inline, and offline. So online, go online and claim your online real estate. And that is your name. So my name, Julian Mather, I have julianmather.com. My Twitter handle is @JulianMather. My YouTube channel is JulianMather1. Now, if it's not available, there are other options, and we can talk about that later, but we are going into the online world, and you have earned your respect that goes with your name throughout life. So go and see if it's available, and if you can claim it. Most of the times, a lot of times it's going to be free or might cost you about $10 or $12 a year to hold your website name. Go and claim it. That's the first thing you can do. For the future, second, and this is your mental, how you can reshape your mindset. There's a book. It's called The War of Art, and it's a small book. Read it, because there's a thing that stops us. Every step of the line, it's resistance. You know that feeling you get that, it doesn't feel right, and I can't do this, I'm not good enough. This explains it beautifully, and it's why it's nice is because it's actually a reversal of the art of war. So anyone in the military who knows about military strategy and the famous old Japanese the Art of War book that was written, it's written like that, but it's about this personal resistance. Now, the second half of the book goes off into the spiritual realm that I can't get my head around, or maybe I'm just not smart enough. But read the first half. You can get it online. It's cheap. So that's the inline. Now, the offline thing is go and join Toastmasters. There's 350,000 members around the world. I've forgotten how many clubs. You'll find a club close to you. Honestly, if you want to start reshaping your life and moving off into a right direction, those 3 things: claim your online real estate, read The War of Art, and join Toastmasters. 3 things you can do straight away.
That's excellent. I love those tips. I recently joined Toastmasters about a month and a half ago, and
good on you.
Yeah, and I'm blogging about my journey, as a matter of fact. So once a week, I've committed to writing a blog post about my speaking journey. I've got a goal to speak. My goal is to speak at a TEDx here locally, and I'm on track to meet that goal. But I wanted to further my education, so Toastmasters is one of the tools that I did. As a matter of fact, a blog post that I just released today, as a matter of fact, it was a story about my second Toastmaster speech, where I tried to repurpose an hour-long workshop that I gave at a local university. I tried to repurpose that into a 5 to 7 minute speech for Toastmasters, and it didn't turn out so well for me, and I talk about that in the blog post. But there's some resources there that I found extremely helpful, and I'm going to add what you're talking about there as well when we get off the podcast. And then there's several podcasts that specialize in speaking and public speaking that I've included in that blog post, as well as a book that I found incredibly helpful, and that's the book, it's called TED Talks. It's actually written and narrated. I listened to the audio version, so it's written and narrated by the curator of TED Talks, and it just goes into a very detailed look into what makes a good talk, what makes good public speaking and presentations. And so there's a lot, like you said, there's resources out there available. Most of them are free, and at the very least, if they are paid, it's very, very small, pennies on the dollar in terms of information and education that you can gather from it for sure.
Yeah, and I just want to reinforce with everyone that it's not all about public speaking. And public speaking is not necessarily standing on a stage in front of a few hundred people. Public speaking is preparing yourself for your next job interview.
Right.
It could be preparing to do a talk at your daughter's wedding. There are so many different versions of this. Again, it's not just public speaking, it's personal growth. Everyone goes along with their own reasons for turning up there, and you do not get a more supportive environment. And here's the thing, and I've got to mention this, is that if you try to go and learn how to speak in front of people, and that could be standing up in front of one and just, being confident telling a joke, where can you find an audience? It's really hard. I've looked over the years, and Toastmasters is a place you can find an audience. But the audience is full of people who are all there from all different walks of life and going through the same journey you are. And they're so supportive. Wonderful, wonderful place.
We don't find value in one-to-one human exchange in the form of actual audible communication, then our kids are going to fall into that, and pretty soon we're going to find ourselves in a world where everyone finds it difficult to speak to someone else, and I think that's a very dangerous place to be.
Which is more so why people 40 to 60, 70, 80, you've got a lifetime of experience and knowledge and wisdom, and it's all your lumps and bumps and wrinkles of that well-lived life, which is so valuable these days. And online is becoming clogged with information, so much information. We don't need any more information. What we need is wisdom, how to interpret this information. And I feel that there's a golden time for people 40 to 60-year-old coming online, and I think that's probably within about the next 10 years. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Well, Julian, we have run fresh out of time. I could stay on for hours and talk to you. This is just incredible stuff. I really enjoy what you're doing, and I'm going to be following you. You're now part of the Change Your POV community, family, as it were. And so I just wanted to say thank you for reaching out. I'm glad to have you on the show. For the listeners out there, could you just share what was the best? We mentioned a lot of resources here tonight, and don't worry about trying to write it down, folks. It'll all be captured in the show notes for this episode. But where can people go and find, what's the best place they can go to find more about you and what you're doing, Julian?
The best one to go to would be tailormadecareer.com. So that's TAILORMADE career.com. And that's really where my passion is at the moment, with, trying to improve the mental well-being of 45 to 65-year-olds. Because, if you're white and you're male, you're 45 to 65, well, you are in the crosshairs for suicide, which is just crazy. And I think I wake up, I'm in smack bang in the middle of that demographic, and I think, wow, I don't feel like that. So what do I know? Maybe there's something I know that could be helping someone else. And, and I'll be that site you're going to go to, you're going to find value there. It's the start of another one of my career changes. And, it's going to take me probably 5 years to get where I want to be with that. But I'm going to implement the same process that I've followed with all my other changes.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Thank you, Julian, for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to more conversations in the future. Folks, you can find, again, all of the information we talked about over at the show notes page for this episode at changeyourpov.com/episode 133. Never miss an episode. Hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. We have a lot more great content headed your way. Come be a part of our community over at Change Your POV Squad, which is our Facebook group. All right, folks, until next time. Well, I hope you enjoyed this interview with Julian as much as I did. My takeaway is that sometimes you have to get out from behind the camera. It becomes too comfortable to just watch. So put it down, step in front, and get a little uncomfortable doing. Walt Disney reminds us that we keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things, because we are curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths.